Learning AWS, learning Azure, learning Google Cloud, for me was much easier than learning programming. Learning Docker, learning Kubernetes, learning Spring Boot, learning Terraform. These were much easier for me than learning to write great unit tests, learning to simplify design, learning to simplify architecture. And I found some of the things that worked for me while learning were the 80-20 rule, finding the best way I learn. I found that there were certain things that worked for me specifically, and also trying to put myself in uncomfortable situations. These are some of the things which helped me learn very, very quickly. And I'm delighted to have Koushik and Siva here, who have been continuously learning technology and evolving with it for the last 2 decades. Koushik and Siva, welcome to today's discussion.
Thank you,
Thank
Ranga.
you.
Glad to be here.
Technology has been evolving constantly, right? I mean, from JSP servlets a few years back, actually a few decades back, to today, we talk about cloud DevOps, a lot of new frameworks, a lot of new tools, and a lot of things. And each of us is expected to keep up with it, right? So, Kaushik, let's start with you probably. Like, how do you see this journey for last 2 decades as far as learning is concerned for you?
Oh, learning is continuous. It never ends, and it's almost like a steady state. It's an enabler. You have to learn in order to do your job, and then at the same time, the more you learn, the right stuff that you learn, the better you are as a software developer. So, learning is something that I've always uh, learned to love. Sometimes I do love it, sometimes I don't love it, but it's a constant thing that's kept me company for the 2 decades that I've been in this industry.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's continuous thing. It's not something which you do every few weeks or every few months. It's like something which stays with you, right? Cool. Shiva, how do you see that? How do you see learning?
Yeah, when you start your career as a software developer, it's like you subscribe to a lifelong learning program. There is no, okay, you learn for a few years and then you are done. There is no such thing. You have to learn new things every day, and be it on job or be it for your own learning purpose for new stuff. So whatever the reason is, you have to learn continuously every day. That's how I see it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think continuous learning, that's the same message coming across from Kaushik and Shiva as well. So, Shiva, let's start with you. Are there any specific things that you do which enables you to keep learning every day, right? So, like learning itself takes a lot of energy. It's not like it's something which is easy to do, right? How do you
Yeah.
do that? How do you continuously learn? What are the things that help you, or what are any tips or strategies that you follow to be able to learn continuously?
Yeah. So when I think back, right, when I started my career in 2006, all you need to know is kind of a core Java and servlets and JSP, probably struts and Hibernate, and a bit of HTML, CSS, and jQuery. That's it. You are a full stack developer. And probably you may need to work on a few other things, but that's largely what a Java developer needs to know. But looking at today's technology stack and how many things you need to know, it's kind of unimaginable. Like it is very hard to keep up with all the new technologies coming in, and then you need to cope up with the changes also continuously. So, and also over the time, the scope of learning is going to increase more and more only. Like you just knowing the back end technology is not sufficient. Now you need to know a bit of DevOps stuff. You need to know a bit of front end development, right? So it is a continuous process, and you have to learn how to learn effectively. Otherwise, just blindly going into some rudimentary way, it's not going to help because there are too many things to learn. When
Absolutely.
I look back, right, I see a common pattern that I follow, and along the way, I did a lot of mistakes. Also, I learned from my mistakes, and I came up with some kind of a pattern how I learn things.
Okay.
Usually, I go in a three-step manner. Like first, I put some thought about what I need to learn because there are a million things out there to learn. and I'm not going to live for next 300 years to learn all of them, right? So
Absolutely. None of us
so
was
I
going to
need
be here.
to so I need to pick what is going to be valuable for me and what gives value for my work and for my personal learning purpose. Uh, so I need to pick what I need to learn. Second thing is actually learning this. And the most important part is once you learn a thing, you need to organize that knowledge that you acquired with a lot of hard work. That is where I did a lot of mistakes and then I learned from it. So basically, these three patterns I follow. And if I had to talk about the second aspect of how to learn effectively,
Mm.
I usually follow a phased manner. Like I usually follow 3 or 4 phases. In the first phase, suppose I want to learn, say, JPA Hibernate or Kubernetes, anything, right?
Mm.
I try to look for any video course or a book. I personally prefer book so that I can simply
Okay.
copy paste the snippets and then follow along. In the
Okay.
first phase, I just want to get my hands on. I don't really try to understand every nitty gritty detail about the technology. I just want to
Okay.
feel how it is and then just follow along the book. And also, I constantly try to avoid going in depth of any complex topic, just a basic
Okay.
stuff and how to get the overall feeling about it. That is the phase one. The next, I try to take that knowledge and then try to put a simple application, nothing complex, like a to-do application or any simple CRUD application.
Okay.
So I may get few things here and there, and then get basic stuff done.
Okay.
And then I do a third phase where I try to build a little bit more complex application, like say a e-commerce application, a shopping cart, things like that. There I do get a lot of a little more details and kind of that is where I actually learn the patterns. Okay, we can do things in a very different ways, in multiple ways, but that is the
Right.
phase I try to learn what is the better way, how people do, other people do it. So that is where I learn. And the fourth phase is like I take a step back and then look at it in a from a different point of view, like when not to use this technology. Right now,
Okay.
let's say if you take Kubernetes, people go crazy about Kubernetes. Everyone wants to do it. But what are the cases where you should not go to Kubernetes, where you should not use JPR Hibernate? So I try to see pros and cons, when to use it, when not to use it. So
Okay.
that's how my entire learning process goes. And
Okay.
once I go through all these phases, right, I make sure that I take a note of every aspect that I learn. I never
Okay.
miss a blog article. I never miss a important point without noting down in my notes. Because
Okay.
what happens is a common mistake most of the people do is when they try to read a book or something, they go through it, read every bit of it, and then if they are not going to use immediately, say next week or next month, most likely they are going to forget about it. They know
Absolutely.
high level how it is, what it is, but they are going to mostly forget about most of the bits. So if you have to again try to use it after a couple of months, the bad thing is you have to read through all the content. You know it is there,
Exactly.
but you don't know where exactly it is there. You have to go through again 200 pages to pick where it is exactly. Whereas if you
Absolutely.
take consciously take notes of it, right? It's like a just 10 pages. You know it is there, and you just need the syntax or a kind of a configuration. It's going to be much faster to refresh what you already know.
Yeah.
Uh, this is the overall pattern that I used to follow.
Shiva, I think you brought in a lot of aspects in there. Probably we can discuss those things in depth for rest of the hour. I think let's probably pick up a few things from there, right? One is I think what we see is basically you worked out something which works for you, right? You said you have a step-by-step process which you follow. A few elements I can see in there are one is focus on books, right? You like reading books than courses, and actually that's the same for me as well. I like when I want to learn something new, I probably pick 5 books on that specific topic. And actually, I like physical books rather than digital books. So you would see a lot of them behind me. So I pick up a book and start. That's the same for me as well. Koushik, what kind of means do you use to get started? Like, do you like videos, books, or what works for you?
I do a bit of everything. I find like I'll reach for the best source I can find on that topic. Sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's
Okay.
a YouTube video, sometimes it's a course. So it depends on what the topic is.
Okay.
But yeah, I have a you were right about following that process. I kind of have that, a similar process as well, and I can kind of outline how I approach learning, if you folks are interested.
Yeah,
Um,
please go ahead.
the way I see it is, when I want to learn a topic, I first look at it at a very high level. I'm not even thinking about implementing. Right? It's about what's the problem space? Why is this technology there? And is there a way I can bucket it with some other technology? Okay, so the Kubernetes, Docker belong to one bucket, versus
Absolutely.
something else which a coding related stuff belongs to another bucket. So I kind of bucket these different technologies, and once I kind of get a lay of the land and how things are, that is something that will last for a while. The thing about coding and more hands-on stuff is a lot of what we learn in software industry is uh, you know use it or lose it kind of a thing, right? You have to constantly use it, otherwise you end up forgetting it and you're going to have to go back. Honestly, there have been situations where I have prepared to make a course, and then a year down the line I've completely forgotten about the technology. I end up watching my own course to say, like, okay, what was I thinking, how did I learn this, to refresh myself. So it is very common. So for folks listening, if you feel like, okay, I learned something and now I forget it, well, that is what happens, right? You have to constantly use it, otherwise you lose it. Which is why
Absolutely.
having this layered approach to learning definitely helps. Have a high level understanding of what the topic is. You may not remember the syntax. Syntax is something you can look up afterwards, or
Absolutely.
Google it or go to Stack Overflow. So have a high level understanding of the problem space, what the technology offers, and like Siva mentioned, when do you use it, when do you not use it, what are the pros, what are the cons, and some design aspects. So those things are sticky, they stick in your mind. So I do that kind of learning first. Once I do that, then there are certain technologies which interest me, or certain technologies that I find valuable that I can apply. Then I go, okay, let me go one level down. And that initial analysis is going to give me an idea about, okay, what are some good resources for it? Do I just go to the manual, the website manual? Do I look up a book? Is there a course? Are there good YouTube videos? So I go from there, pick the best thing that I can find, which kind of appeals to me, and I deep dive there for certain selected topics. So it's kind of like,
Right.
it's almost like a funnel. So the things that I go very deep into are things that I know that I can really make an impact on, or which is directly related to my career. So that's how I approach learning.
Okay. Okay. So if I can kind of uh, look at it from you start from an overview perspective, understand what the tool is, get a high level picture of where you can use the tool, how you can use it before you probably deep dive into certain selected areas.
Right.
Cool, cool. And yeah, I think like as we can see in here, right, learning is very individualized. It's not like there is a pattern which works for Koushik, for Shiva, and me. It's like we have different approaches. But I think one thing which we generally see, like one thing which I generally observe when I talk to people who are good at learning in the technology space, is choosing what to learn, right? Because there are so many things that are happening in the technology world that it's an impossible thing to pick everything and be an expert at it. So, Kaushik, one of the things I observed is, like, in the infrastructure as code space, I see that you have really dedicated yourself into Terraform, and you are focusing a lot on Terraform. Is there like, how did you pick? Like, I think the interesting thing is, okay, why did you pick infrastructure as code as first? And the next one is, why did you get into Terraform? Right. So it's an area where you started to dedicate a little bit of time. So how did you go about choosing that?
Yeah, I knew about Terraform before I went for the deep dive. Again, reiterating the process that I followed. Like, I learned about all these technologies. Terraform just happened to be something that I needed for what I was working on at the time. So I was like, okay, let me learn about it. And when I learned about it, I was like, this is cool. I should make some courses. I have the experience I can teach. So
Right.
once I got into, like, okay, I need to teach, I need to dive deeper into the technology, and that's how it happened. But yeah, it's I am working on Docker now. I have a Docker course, so I'm going to be doing a deep dive into Docker, and then I have some experience with Kubernetes. I'm going to expand on that experience and make a course. So For me, it's a little bit different from a typical viewer who doesn't have a YouTube channel, who isn't making courses. For me, it's one of the factors which influence what I learn is what I would like to teach. So
Okay,
I never teach something that I don't have experience in, because that's never going to work out fine. So there has
absolutely.
to be a little bit of experience, but then the need to teach influences my learning as well. That's another layer.
Okay, cool. Shiva, like, can you like briefly like touch upon a few things that you have learned in the last few years and how you went about picking them and how do you even go about learning them in depth?
Yeah, yeah. One of the reasons why I pick a technology is now that I'm playing a role of tech lead or architect. Sometimes I am responsible for picking up what programming language, what framework, what tool we need to use for the project.
Hmm.
So if I don't have to have a mastery of all the technologies to choose from, but I need to
Yeah.
be aware of what is out there so that I don't have to use some old hard to use technology. So that is one way I start looking at the community. Okay, what are new things coming up? Are they really good or are they just new shiny things? I try to grab as much as possible from various sources like community websites or Twitter or something like that, and try to get a sense of it. Is it really something I would like to use for my next project, or is it bringing any value? So in the recent times, few things that I really got excited about is Kubernetes,
Hmm.
and a few things in DevOps area. Like I used Pulumi, and
Hmm.
I also looked at AWS CDK. One of the reasons try to look for alternatives for CloudFormation is I started with CloudFormation. I really don't like it for various reasons, and then I learned Terraform because of some official work. We have to create a new module to provision MongoDB, so that's when I
Hmm.
learned Terraform. But then I got to know about CDK and then Pulumi. They are kind of a very similar, and the
Yeah.
good thing is you can use a real programming language, and things are much simpler compared to doing everything in YAML, right?
Yeah.
And then actually 3 4 years ago, I know Kubernetes is so popular, becoming everyone is talking about Kubernetes, but I thought of, okay, no need to jump on every shiny thing, just wait for some time, see is it
Right.
going to be really adopted in enterprises. So it is adapted because of, for various good
Exactly.
reasons. And okay, in most of my recent projects, people are using Docker and Kubernetes to some extent. So, as a tech lead or application developer, I no need to master Kubernetes from the administration point of view, but
Yeah.
knowing how it works is going to help me to do things in a development side. Okay, it is going to run in a containerized environment. So I
Absolutely.
shouldn't be assuming that okay, the file system is always there. This service is going to run all the time. So I'll get to know about how it is going to run in the production environment. So I started learning Kubernetes, and then I think I got some good understanding of it as a developer, not as an administrator. And then I wrote a series of blog posts as well. Okay, if you are a Java developer, Spring Boot developer, okay, how do you learn about pods, services, deployments, and then ingress rules,
Absolutely.
all these things. Some basic stuff which you need
Yeah.
to know. I blogged about it also. Yeah, this is how
Cool.
I try to. Yeah.
Okay. So if I can actually summarize this discussion from the last few minutes, okay, go learn Kubernetes and Terraform because Koushik has started working on. So Kubernetes, I think, yeah, that's exactly what I see as well, right? So I think with the emergence
Actually,
of
sorry for interrupting. So
no,
Terraform
we'll
is
get to
really
Terraform versus Pulumi, Shiva. I'm
no,
not
we are
sure
not
where you
going.
are.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Yeah,
We'll get
I
to
just
that. That's a very interesting discussion. Terraform versus Pulumi would be a very interesting conversation. But I guess
yeah.
if like Kubernetes is something like with the like a lot of enterprises are actually now earlier it was cloud first, today it's container first. So once you do containers, probably like the best place to run containers today is Kubernetes, right? So and even I've been talking to a lot of people from Microsoft Technologies, and they are saying Kubernetes as well. So that's kind of unexpected and yeah, I think Kubernetes is one. And the second thing that you were talking about, I think, was the infrastructure as code part. right? So Terraform, Pulumi, AWS CDK, all these are into that space. I think it's now the conversation between YAML versus programming, right? So that's where the conversation is going. And I see a lot of people who are actually into operations, right? So if you look at DevOps, right, there are people in operations team like who started with operations. They actually are the ones who have a major say, I feel, and they like YAML much more than programming. So at least that's the feeling I have. Why like Terraform has much more, like obviously Terraform also has the first mover advantage because Terraform came first, and probably after that is when okay, if you can do in YAML, you can probably do it with programming as well, and that's where things like Pulumi, AWS CDK. Like a couple of years back, when I first heard of Pulumi and when I first tried it, I felt actually Pulumi had a lot of things going for it. But it's just that I think it's more the factors related to operation. I mean, being like operations team more familiar with YAML, and they preferring to use YAML than programming. And also, like, yeah, I think things like that are some of the reasons why, like, programmatic models, direct programmatic models of uh, writing code to build infrastructure probably are not doing as well as Terraform. Like, any views there, Koushik or Shiva?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Siva.
Okay, so personally, I feel like it is similar to what we have for Maven versus Gradle, right? For Maven,
Absolutely.
you don't have too much flexibility for a large number of projects. Maven out of the box conventions are more than sufficient, but you
Right.
have to go beyond that, and you need kind of a very customizations and all. Maven is difficult, and Gradle shines there. At the same time, if you see many Gradle projects, they go crazy. They implement all sorts of creative logic in there, and for every new member, it takes a lot of effort to actually understand what really they are doing it in the build configuration files. Whereas in a Maven project, you can't do any crazy stuff. It is a standard thing. Any new developer can easily understand what's going on there. I
Okay.
kind of see the same pattern here also, like cloud formation or Terraform. They are kind of a very standard. You know what resources you are going to define, and you don't really implement very creative logic there. So any person who is familiar with Terraform can jump onto a new code base and they can understand what resources they are creating and all. Whereas
Hmm.
if you, one person joins a new team who is using either CDK or Pulumi, they need to know, okay, what is going on, because there is a full programmatic power.
Okay.
Anybody can create any number of abstractions on core primitives, and then one needs to learn how it is working in this particular project.
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
Pros and cons, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the more complexities, uh, the less people who would be interested in learning it.
Uh, the one thing I would like to add is I totally agree with what you say, Shiva. The one thing I would like to add is based on what I've seen in Terraform, I've never encountered a situation where I felt like it was lacking in any way. Also, I've noticed that whenever people use the Terraform, the HCL language allows for things like loops and variables and conditions and all that stuff. I've noticed that people run into problems only when they actually use those constructs, just basic infrastructure definitions, which don't have a lot of complexities, are usually easier and less of a headache to manage. So with these two in mind, I've never run into a situation where, oh man, HCL doesn't do. I need to whip up a programming language to do this. Well, it's never happened to me. So maybe I don't work on complex enough projects, but I think the complexity of what I worked on is maybe representative of a lot of other projects out there. I would say the majority of projects out there. So when you can do with not having that complexity, why take it on? So that's what I would think. I kind of disagree with the Maven versus Gradle, and Shiva, you said you can't do anything crazy with Maven. Well, you just put a plugin in there, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with Maven as well. I have done that myself, but no. I do agree with the point behind what you were saying, right? So if the technology doesn't start out with complexity, technology starts out with simple stuff, and then you can layer on complexity if you want to do that. I think that's better off because most people may not need that complexity to begin with. Uh, so I prefer Terraform, but then it's a little bit of an unqualified opinion because I haven't explored Pulumi too much. So
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, the reason why, like, I thought it was interesting is because, as you can see, like, even when you pick a space like infrastructure as code, there are so many things to learn that it's like probably not even easy to pick up what to learn from there. So this is the first thing that people need to do when actually they are picking up something, right? So if you, let's say, think, okay, you want to start with DevOps, you probably would today want to start with Kubernetes because that might be something which almost everybody is likely to use, seeing where the industry is heading. And if you want to also get into the infrastructure as code space, you have to do evaluation as to what is the thing which gives you the most value, right? It's not just directly jumping into something and trying to learn it, but it's more about a thought process which goes behind the scenes as to whether you're likely to use that technology. Like right now, we are discussing about Terraform, like Pulumi, AWS CDK. There are a lot of other things, right? You have, like Shiva is saying, there is cloud formation. Like each of the clouds have their own specific infrastructure as code kind of syntactical language of their own choice. So it's not that you have to master everything. You have to pick up something. I mean, I think keeping up with the trends does not mean going into deep with everything, but it's about understanding the space, understanding what problem a particular space is solving. For example, infrastructure as code, there's a problem it's solving, right? The fact is, like, recreating environments, if you do it manually, is a headache, is a big headache. And managing versions of environments, right? You make a few changes on dev, there is, if you are manually managing that process, it's very, very difficult to. So understanding why a specific thing is happening, understanding what is the best tool to handle that, or not the best tool, but probably what is the tool that gives you the most value. Probably the best tool is not the most popular tool usually. It's, you need to pick up as to, you need to do a little bit of analysis as to how to pick up a specific tool, and then probably understand what problems it solves, and then deep dive. Is that how it works for you, Koushik and Shiva?
Yeah, it is always like that only. Like, even though I learn Kubernetes, Docker, and CDK, Pulumi, only for one project I need to actually do that Pulumi stuff by myself. For another one short-term project, I need to use Terraform by myself. In all other scenarios, there are dedicated DevOps teams who takes
Yeah,
care of administering entire Kubernetes, and then they create Helm charts and all the stuff. I don't have to do it anything. Even they don't allow me to do it anything. That's a different
absolutely.
thing. Me being aware of how it is going to work is really helping me when there is a problem, when something is not working as expected. I can sit with the
Absolutely.
DevOps folks, and then I can talk to them, and I can, maybe probably I can help from the perspective, where okay, we are passing these environment variables over here, we are expecting these things here, which might not be passing from DevOps code. So it becomes very easier to communicate with them when I have a bit of understanding on the infra side.
Yeah.
Yeah, in many
Okay.
places there is, though it is called DevOps, which you are supposed to work closely with them. There are kind of a different teams, but still knowing about this really helps when you are pushing your application to production. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as they call it, right, the T-shaped skills, that is probably referred a lot of
Yeah.
times, right? It's about having a broad overview of a lot of things, but obviously having in-depth knowledge in the specific field, right?
Yeah.
Kaushik, how do you see it?
I agree. One problem I see is a lot of people get too attached to their choice of technology. It almost becomes like they make it a part of their identity. Like, I'm a Docker developer. If anybody says something bad about Docker, it's like, no, I'm gonna fight them.
Exactly.
It's yeah, a T-shaped knowledge does make sense. I think the more somebody gets into the whatever is the part where it's going in depth, that's what people tend to get too attached to. But it's it's not necessary because again, technologies come and go. Docker is here today. I don't know if it'll be around 5 years from now. Maybe there will be something else, which is why it's important to understand like the problem space, understand what is the technology what is it that the technology gives us, and then having this overview of what else is in that space. So let's
Mm,
say something more popular comes along, we can easily switch and learn. If you have done a deep dive in one technology, it's not going to be very hard to do. Like, do I have to learn that whole thing all over again? Well, no. It's if it's a similar problem space, it's probably going to
Exactly.
be so much more easier for you to learn than if somebody was starting from the scratch. So yeah, don't be
Absolutely.
attached to your choices. Right tool for the job, and then keep an eye out for better tools, so that even if you picked something that was the right tool for the job previously, maybe there's a better tool. So it makes sense to adopt that. So yeah, that's the way I look at it.
I
Absolutely.
can I can
Please go ahead,
totally
Shiva.
correlate with what Kaushik said, being attached to a particular tool or framework, because I am very much attached to Spring Boot. Like I have been using it for over, when it was 1.2. Uh, so I have used it extensively, and even I wrote 2 books on it. So kind of in the workplaces, it is I am the go-to Spring Boot guy. So I kind of very much attached to it. And then when on Twitter or anywhere, when somebody says Spring Boot is complex and all, I go to any lengths of discussion saying that no, it is good. But kind of over the time, I know, okay, we don't have to go and attach myself to a particular technology or anything. But that is very common thing in a tech community. Like people get so much attached to a particular technology, and now I don't attach myself to so strongly, because kind of I see now we have Quarkus and Micronaut, all these things doing more or less similar thing, even more powerful in some areas. But I kind of take a step back. I don't too much attach myself to any particular technology now.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, yeah, the same with me. I was a big Spring Boot guy as well. But yeah, I think with time, with experience, I think we kind of step away. Like a lot of times, it's experience. Once you gain the right experience, once you probably open yourself to new ideas, once I think that would slowly change, and that's what I saw happening with me as well. And to relate to Kaushik's points about uh, like uh, like when like a lot of times actually, for example, if I'm learning Spring Boot, right? So it's not about like when we are learning Spring Boot, I think it's very important to understand why we are learning Spring Boot, right? You are learning Spring Boot maybe to develop a web application, maybe to develop a REST API, maybe you want to use microservices. So if we actually shift our attention from the framework or tool to actually what you're building with it. So let's say I'm building a web application with Spring Boot or a REST API. So if I actually shift my attention towards REST API, so I'm building REST APIs with Spring Boot, and I would want to start focusing, thinking about REST API. What are the best practices? How do I build good REST API? And using Spring Boot as a means to do that, I feel it's easy to switch to something else. Then we are not really attached to the framework or the tool, but you are actually learning to build something, right? When you're starting to learn programming, it's not the language which is important; it's the problem-solving skills which are important. So if you actually look at it that way, and actually like take that analogy further, for example, web application, focus on building what is important in a web applications. How do you handle sessions? How do you do authentication and authorization? Those are the important parts, and the frameworks which enable you to do that are just tools, right? uh, so I felt that kind of analogy is very, very useful when learning something. Focus on what you're trying to build and not a lot on the tool or framework, so that when the tool or framework changes, you are able to easily adapt and you are not attached to a tool or framework.
There was
So
an interesting thing that I don't remember where I heard it or I read it. So the question goes, what is learning, right? How do you define learning? What do you mean by you're learning something? Most people go, it's like I'm acquiring some knowledge, right? You're getting knowledge. You know something now that you didn't know before. Is that learning? It's probably not, because it seems like a hollow definition. A definition that really resonates with me about learning is not about acquiring knowledge. Learning is about behavior change. Okay, so for example, um, take the example of smoking, right? People know that smoking is not good for health, right? People have learned that smoking is not good for health. Would you say that that person is now wiser or learned? Well, no. It As long as that knowledge is not affecting their behavior, if they continue smoking, well, did you learn anything? Well, you got information, but you didn't quite learn it. You learn only when it has affected your behavior, when there is a change in behavior. That is true for for programming as well. And you talked about application, right? So when do you learn Spring Boot, or when do you say you learn Spring Boot? When you are a Spring Boot developer. It's not just getting knowledge or getting information or learning about the features. It is about when you can actually use it to build a web application or build an API or whatever, right? So with that with that perspective, when you approach learning as like, okay, I'm going to learn something to change my behavior, to change my ability to do something, then it kind of takes away all these things like, okay, is it this syntax versus that syntax? Is it this framework versus that framework? You're focusing more on how am I changing the way in which I work? How am I building better applications or building better mobile apps or whatever, right? So that is the best perspective someone can take towards learning, and it is going to improve your learning as well. You're not just going to go sit back and watch a course without applying it. You're not going to just flip pages of a book. That's not learning, right? It's only
Absolutely.
learning only when you've taken that knowledge and then built something with it. So I'm a very big fan of applied knowledge, and I think that's what people should be focusing on when they learn.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I found that really, really useful, that perspective of actually, like when I shifted, like I, initially when I built courses, I was thinking, okay, what are the features of Spring I can teach in this course? So that was a completely different perspective. Once I shifted down to, okay, how do I build a web application with a specific thing? That gave me a completely different perspective. And like that also enabled me actually, like as we build more and more courses. So the first course I built was develop a web application with JSP and servlets. And then like it was easy to kind of do the same thing with Spring MVC, do the same thing with Spring Boot. Like as technology changes, I found it easy to explain the differences, to learn the differences myself first by using the same web application as the model and build different things. I mean, build it with different frameworks. So I found that really, really easy. Like when you develop a full stack application, maybe you have a, like I kind of use it to do application as the same base. So the same application, how you do in like a JSP servlet world, in a Spring Boot world, in maybe a full stack world, how do you do the same thing with React and Angular? And how you deploy it to the cloud? How would think of deploying it usually, and how do you deploy it to the cloud? Like that kind of, that practical knowledge really, really helps, because now you are thinking it from a different perspective.
So I would like to add a different angle to that aspect. What Kaushik said, like yes, that is really a very good way of looking at it. Like you are not just learning something, you are having a new ability using a tool, be it a programming language or a framework. You are learning some ability where you can build something with it, right?
Yes.
That is the knowledge that you are it is going to stick with you for a long time instead of just knowing some quick dirty thing. uh, but when you see in the real world, like many people probably working in service based companies and all, they are expected to learn, pick up few languages, frameworks, and then work on the projects and then move on to next project. So sometimes we end up working with, say, some technologies that we really don't want to, for a number of reasons. But there, the need of the hour is you just have to get enough knowledge to move forward. You might, it is definitely a worth to learn it in depth and then learn how it is used and what purpose it serves and all. But in the actual companies, in many cultures, like you just go jump on it and then understand it and then move forward. So there, like we need to go with a different perspective. Okay, first I need to understand what's going on there, and you may need not master everything about it, and then just try to solve the issue and then move forward. Because when you are working in a deadline driven environment, this aspect also helps a bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what you're talking about is a space where you don't have a choice and you have to work with a technology which is outdated. You just
Not
learn
necessarily
whatever is,
outdated. Yeah,
yeah.
not necessarily outdated. Even the most recent technologies, some technologies I don't really like them, but just
Okay.
I'll move forward. Yeah,
So the way you do that is basically learn whatever is needed to get through the job.
yeah,
And okay, cool, cool. Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? A lot of times, if especially in the IT services world, you don't have a lot of choice as to which project you're going into. But
yeah,
even there, I think a focus on what you're building rather than the technology itself if you are able to focus on that and try and get knowledge about that, probably might help. But it's
Definitely.
not an easy problem to solve as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I guess let's probably pick specific elements of learning and probably we'll just have a quick discussion around them, right? So being hands-on, I feel like like when I look at experiences, when I work with a lot of people on learning, I feel some people get into like some people are actually like even before they start anything, learning anything, they get hands-on, right? Or like for example, for me it's more like, okay, I want to understand what problem it is being solved, what is the like area where it fits in, what is it replacing. I want to actually spend maybe a few hours actually watching videos about it, for example, probably, or reading a book about that specific thing. I like getting a high level perspective of something before I go deeper. Like I like to kind of uh, get a feel for it, like, and only then I would jump into it. Like for example, I think again it's not the same approach for different things, right? If I'm learning programming, for example, right, the best thing would be to get hands on, start doing it. But if you are experienced, probably if you have a little bit of experience with programming and you are exploring a new language, probably you'd want to understand it a little bit more theoretically, understand what how it is different from what you know before you go deep dive into it, right? So I mean, it's not something where one size fits all. It's like you have to evaluate when to go hands on, when not to go hands on. Maybe one size fits approach does not work in here. What's your opinion about going hands on, especially in the technology world, right? We have so many languages, frameworks, tools. Like, uh, how do you go about it? How do you go about choosing when to go hands on?
Um, you want me to go first, Shiva?
Yeah, please,
Yes.
Koushik.
So yeah, I do go hands on, but it's only after I know what the tool is all about because like I'm doing hands on stuff is like, what the heck am I doing? What's this for? Like that question will be in the back of my mind.
Right.
So I do like to know the problem space, and so that when I'm doing hands on, I kind of get a sense for why I'm doing the steps that I'm doing. I usually look at, like, when I feel like, okay, I got a sense of the technology and I need to do something to see it working, I usually go to the technology's website. Most of the new frameworks and technologies these days have some kind of hello world sample that you can start with, right? Most of them have a quick start or click here to get started button. So it's very hard not to click it and try it. So that's what I do. And especially if you can just spin up a container, like there is very little friction to just get us some software and try it out and set up an
Yeah.
environment and do it. That's what I start out with. So learning the overview, doing hands-on with a hello world example, and then based on that I can go either to look at the theoretical side of things, or I can go further hands-on, like depending on what I'm confused by. So that's the direction I go.
Cool. So Shiva, how do you go about doing that?
So before picking up learning some new subject, usually some thought process go into my mind why I want to learn this new framework or language. But once I cross that phase, and then I want to take a look at this particular tool, be it whatever Kubernetes, Java, any framework, anything. So the first thing I do is I take say 30 minutes or 1 hour to skim through their official site and documentation. What exactly it is trying to solve, what problem. Is it some kind of a web framework? Is it some kind of a persistence? And if it is persistence, what is the need for creating a new framework when there is already 10 other choices? So once I get a gist of what this particular tool is trying to solve, and immediately I jump into hands-on. Like Kaushik said, just go with a quick start, and then try to add more and more stuff to learn. So there is a magic in writing hello world. Like you get a sense of, okay, I have the tools, whatever is required to install, and okay, I'm ready to dive deep into this particular thing. Maybe if it is a Docker, okay, you have a Docker installed properly and configured everything, and then you can just deep dive into it. So I believe hello world gives some kind of a confidence where you can just go deeper into. And then For me, learning is like okay, I read about a section and immediately I try to follow whatever is mentioned there. It's all like a primitives. You pick up primitives. Okay, for example, if I am reading about say hibernate jp, okay, I read about say one to many relationship. I just come think of some example and try to follow along it, and then I read about other relations, I follow along with it. I
Right.
don't have to be master about various permutations, combinations of all these configurations, but I just get it out. Okay, this is how you configure it. After that, I take a step back and then think about one proper example application and then try to build it. So mine is like a read a section, follow along, read a section, follow along. It goes like that. That's why I
Okay.
prefer ebooks. I don't even remember when was the last physical book I read about
Okay.
technology. I prefer it's like I read about it and still I can copy paste code snippets and just follow along.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the approach I follow.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, I think early in the career, like probably hands-on is very, very important, right? So when you're starting with programming or when you are developing your first web application, first full stack application. But I guess as you start going further in your career, probably it's much more to like if there's a new tool, you'd probably think about uh, a high level overview, probably get a picture around like how it compares with the earlier approach of doing it. So you'd want to get a big picture first, maybe before you'd want to do a lot more hands-on with it. Right? But again, this is not something which would be applicable for everything, depending on how it is, right? So if I'm actually trying to learn functional programming, for example, right? So then probably it makes sense to actually see how it was done earlier and go really deep and solve a lot of problems so that you really understand functional programming. That's one place I can see where going really hands-on really, really helps, because without going deep, you would probably not even understand a lot of things related to that. But let's say if I'm learning a framework, right? Let's say if instead of Spring Boot, I'm going to Micronaut, right? Probably the depth at which you need to learn Micronaut would not be the same, because if you know Spring Boot, probably you know a lot of things about how Micronaut works by default as well. Cool. Okay, let's yeah get into probably like the process of learning, right? So I found like for me, like I find having a constant place for learning, constant time for learning, uh, sometimes really helps. It's not always possible to have a constant place and constant time, but whenever it's possible to do that, I find that I get into a proper focus, and I focus, like I'm able to focus a lot more, and probably I'm able to get a lot more out of those kind of learning sessions. But that's possible for me because I don't do a full-time job, right? I mean, for me, probably creating courses is my full-time job. So I can focus saying, okay, first 4 hours of the day, I would not touch anything except to try and learn something, right? But that's not really possible. For example, if you're on a job. So how do you handle that? Where do you get the time to start exploring new things and learn? Kaushik, do you want to start?
Sure. For me, I wish I could set aside 4 hours and learn. With my work commitments and family commitments, it's like a dream. Unfortunately, that's not possible for me. What I do is a little more iterative and a little more fragmented. Sometimes I just, we talked about the Hello World example. We just do a Hello World example and then try and do something as a branch off from there. Or I usually have like a repo. Let's say I'm watching a course. I usually have a repo where I follow along and do what that other person is doing. But I usually don't follow exactly the same. It's I try variations as I hear the instructor teach, and I come in and out of it. So I don't set aside time. Like okay, I watch like around 3 or 4 videos of a course, play around with it, go away, come back, look at it later. Sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's a week from then. So it's very unpredictable, but
Absolutely.
I just have to find time. So not that I'm doing this by choice, but I'm doing it because I have to, and the proof that that works as well. So if you don't have the
Absolutely.
time, iterative learning is also possible.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I think you have to fit it into the schedule, right? It's not, I mean, as we grow, like as we age, the number of commitments other than work are also bigger. So, yeah, you have to fit everything into the mix. Shiva, how does it work for you?
Yeah. Probably I am going to say something which I regret later, but nevertheless I'm going to say it. So hardly I spend 5 hours of official 8 hour workday on the official project, and then I spend 3 hours learning something new. You may wonder, it is not morally correct or whatever, but this is how it works. From the very beginning of my career, right? I get a task. Probably someday I quickly finish it. Probably I estimated it might take 6 hours, but I could complete it in 3 hours. The rest of the time, I start learning something new. And over the time, I have been doing this for all of my throughout my career for the last 15 years. So what happened is I keep learning things which is making me complete my official task in much faster way,
Absolutely.
because I'm learning something and then I'm writing some sample application and I have all the bits and pieces of R&D and sample code ready. When next day when I get a task, the R&D is already done. I just need to take that pieces and put it. Probably I can estimate it for 2 hours, but I could complete it in a half an hour only.
Mm,
I I consciously do this. Suppose if I don't know anything about it and how much time I'm going to take it, let's say if it is 6 hours, I still mark, okay, this for this task I need 6 hours, and I know I'm going to complete it in say 3 hours for 4 hours only, and the rest of the 2 hours I spend learning something new. It is a kind of a win-win. You are getting the task done in the same amount of time, and I'm able to learn it as some new thing and also complete the official task on time. So it's a kind of a win-win, and I'm doing this forever and I don't see any problem with it. And in fact, I'm seeing few advantages also, because when I'm learning ahead of time, uh, I know how to do some certain tasks, and when I get the task, I can think about how to do it in a better way because I know one way to complete that task. Now I can think about how we can do it in a better way, how we can do it in an extensible way. Whereas if I don't know anything about it, I can wait for, okay, when I get a task, then only I will think about how we can implement it. Maybe whatever the approach you are following might not be the best approach, but in my way of doing thing, I know, I already know as a one way to complete the task. When the task actually came to me, I can think about how I can do it in a better way. So,
absolutely.
though occasionally I have to spend more time out of office hours, but by and large, I'm doing all that R&D and learning new things and all in a regular day schedule only. I don't have to spend
Okay.
too much time. Yeah.
Okay. So you like the way you are thinking about it is like, okay, learning helps you do your job better. So you are trying to make it as part of your day job so that it helps you do the future tasks more efficiently.
Yes.
And it gives you time. So it's like a cycle where you learn and that helps you make your work faster and thereby giving you time to learn more. That if I look
Yeah.
at that cycle, that's how it works, right? So you learn, save time, again put that back into learning, and you are also doing an efficient job at doing that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, probably the way you explained it probably is not something we would recommend for everybody, but I think the cycle really works, right? The cycle of uh, using learning as a means to save time in how fast you can do things and using that time and putting that back into learning. That's
Yeah.
Kaushik, you have something to add there?
There's a term for it called sharpening the saw. If you're using a
Yeah.
Absolutely.
saw to cut wood, how much time are you going to spend time cutting wood and how much time are you going to spend sharpening it, right? The learning
Absolutely.
is basically analogous to having, sharpening your saw so that when you do work on the saw, it becomes faster. So I completely resonate with what you're saying, Siva. That's it's important to not keep working all the time, but take that break and make sure your saw is sharp.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, let's probably get like we have been talking about learning all the while, right? Another important aspect of our industry is unlearning. Like we talked about, right? We attach ourselves with Spring Boot. I have to unlearn to detach myself from Spring Boot as well. So, is there any conscious unlearning you do, or does that happen automatically for you? Shiva, shall we start with you?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the thing recently, I had to work with Golang, whereas most of my previous projects are all on Spring Boot, and where everything is already ready. When you want to implement something new, all you have to do is add some new starter, and you're almost there. You just need a bit of business logic. Rest of the things is
Absolutely.
already taken care. Whereas when I switch to Golang, it is like a you start from scratch and there is nothing much. All you have to implement most of the stuff by yourself. And I really didn't like it in the beginning, but I see the simplicity aspect of it. It is just amazing. I even wrote a lengthy blog post recently. It took some time for me to really like something, not Spring Boot. That is not Spring Boot, but it takes some time to understand. Okay, we are familiar with Spring Boot way of doing things, but sometimes we have to put that aside and then start from fresh and then try to see why Golang is so popular. If it is not that good, why it is so popular? There must be some good in it. That's why many people are preferring it, be it performance,
Absolutely.
be it simplicity. So that urge is there, right? When you have to implement some feature, you know how to do it in Spring Boot, and
Yeah.
constantly in your mind, some thought going on like, shit, if it is Spring Boot, I just add that starter and put these four configuration properties and be done with it. Now I have to implement a lot of thing in Golang. I hate Golang. I wish I would working with Spring Boot. But you have to
Right.
put that thought aside and then go ahead with it for some time at
Exactly.
least. And
Yeah.
then you start realizing, oh, that's why so many people are loving Golang. So the same thing I happen to see, like you don't like, say, cloud formation and you like Terraform. In that case, just think about why, if many people are using cloud formation, right? There must be some other way to look at it.
Yeah.
So we have to consciously put aside that urge to go back into your comfort tech stack and then run along with this new tech stack for a while at least. Then maybe
Absolutely.
you will like it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think over the period of my career as well, I realized I learned the most when I put myself in really uncomfortable positions. So I was working in a project, I mean, where there was no unit testing or anything of that kind. And I had to switch over to a project where, okay, they follow TDD religiously. There are unit tests for everything. And that's where I felt the learning curve was huge for me. So I went from a place where there was nothing, getting code working is the thing that matters, but like, and next moment I switched to a project where it was like religiously followed everything, how you do things matters more than the result. So that gave me a completely different perspective, and that gave me a lot of learning. And I see that happen throughout my career. Whenever I was in an uncomfortable position, when I was trying to do things which I did not want to do, that's when most of the learning really happened for me. And I guess that's the same thing, right? You're forced now to switch over from Spring Boot to Go. You don't have a choice, and you see that you now start liking Go a little bit more, or more than Spring Boot maybe. Right? So Kaushik, does that happen with you as well?
Siva is not agreeing about anything he likes more than Spring Boot, at least not yet. Um, yeah, for me, it's unlearning is an interesting concept because we talk about how things are. I earlier mentioned about a lot of what we learn is you use it or lose it, right? It's so easy to forget stuff. It's so easy
Yeah,
to take things out of
absolutely.
our head. So unlearning happens automatically. But one area of unlearning is where you have it's not about forgetting the technology or unlearning the technology itself. It's unlearning the habits and patterns that you've picked along with
Yeah,
learning a technology. And
exactly.
the biggest such unlearning I had to do was at a certain point in my career, I switched from being a pure Java developer to a full stack developer, which means including JavaScript, getting into, at the time it was Angular 1. And from there, I went into all the other JavaScript frameworks I could find at the time. That was a significant unlearning because it wasn't that I was forgetting Java. I had
Mm,
to put a hold on things that kind of came second nature to me because I've been coding Java for so many years and say, well, okay, those were the patterns there. This doesn't apply here, right?
exactly.
One very common pattern that I was following at the time, which people don't do these days, even for Java, is have an interface and implementation for things like services and all that stuff. Like when you create a
Yeah,
service, you're supposed to create an
absolutely.
interface and you're supposed to create an implementation. That was like burnt in my brain at that time.
Mm,
And when I went into the JavaScript side of things, it's like, well, it doesn't work. Well, you don't even have classes now. How do I decouple this thing? Everything looks so coupled. It was like I
exactly.
couldn't I couldn't kind of get used to the way things were happening in
Yeah,
JavaScript. So I would say unlearning in my mind is not just about the technology, it's about kind of like providing space for other patterns and
Yeah.
realizing that sometimes patterns are closely tied to technologies. You go to a different technology, you might have to apply a different pattern, which might have been a bad idea in the previous technology, but still you do it because that's more appropriate there. So that's the kind of unlearning that I have. It's very hard, especially the
Yeah.
more you have learned and more you're comfortable with, that change is very hard. But again, once you do it, you kind of get used to, like, tackling things.
Absolutely. So it's
I
like
kind of
once you learn structured programming. Sorry, Shiva, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I kind of observed a similar thing. The longer you stick with one particular programming language or framework, the more difficult it becomes to adapt to new things.
Yeah.
I see exactly, like, if you, I don't know whether it is just me observing like that. When you think about Java programmers, because most of the times Java is being used in large enterprise systems, the way we build things is kind of you make a mental model of this application is going to survive for next say 15, 20 years, and you start designing your application in that way. Along with it, there comes a lot of boilerplates and some kind of huge structures. But when you switch to a, say a PHP or a Python application, they just go very fast, don't think like okay it is going to survive next 20 years or so. They kind of try to solve the today's problem. And if you are coming from a Java background, no, stop, think. It needs to survive for next 20 years. Think and put all kinds of structure there. So I see that pattern in typically from Java background people. But
Yeah.
maybe it is just
Absolutely.
me feeling that way.
No, I think it's different, right? The environment, it's like the environment, right? The language, the framework you're making use of, it kinds of has the patterns which you kind of tend to religiously follow. And when there is a new pattern, that's where the unlearning really comes into picture, right? So you'd want to still like our mind would force us to still use the same pattern, apply it in a new way in the new language, which might not be the right thing to do. Yeah, I think, yeah, it is the same when you switch language frameworks or anywhere, like the patterns, like Koushik is saying, right? So it's that's the most important part. Those are built into your mind of how you use a language, how you use the specific tool, a framework, right? The same thing, right? uh, like one pattern which I frequently see is when people switch to cloud, they just leave things running, right? So you leave a VM running in the cloud. That's a pattern. You are used to it, right? When you are in your data center, it does not matter. You keep it running. It does not cost you any more, maybe electricity and things like that, but it does not matter. But once you are in the cloud, you are still in the same pattern, even though you know that, okay, you pay for what you use, you're still in the same pattern. And that pattern is difficult to unlearn. It's like enterprises also like building new processes as they go and adapt to whatever is happening in the industry. The old habits die hard, as they say. Cool. Yeah, I think very interesting discussion there. Let's go back, right? Let's get your perspective on a high level. Let's say somebody is now in the Spring Boot. Let's say they are building REST APIs with Spring Boot, and they would want to reskill, let's say, to cloud and DevOps. What's the approach that you would recommend? Like somebody who has just knowledge of Spring Boot or building a API, REST API, and they want to start getting their hands dirty with, let's say, playing with containers or container orchestration, or trying to understand how, like, why people are so crazy about the cloud. How do you see it going forward? Kaushik, shall we start with you?
Sure. Cloud is an interesting thing because it's not so much a technology; it's more of a facilitator. So you don't learn cloud to build an app. You learn cloud to deploy an app that you already built. So they aren't really two separate things, right? So the way I see it, if you're learning a tool or a framework which allows you to do something, again, application mindset, right? What are you learning this tool or framework for? Is it is to build something, or it is to make something new? Well, that is going to be your driving factors. Like, what am I going to do with this thing, and
Right.
is this something that I want to do? Right? Okay, is this something that helps me build iOS applications? Okay, do I want to build iOS application? If so, yes, I'm going to go learn Swift. So that's the direction there. With cloud, it's a little different, right? Even if you aren't planning to deploy to the cloud, it is basically a reality now that pretty much everybody is deploying to the cloud and they're seeing cost benefits there. So you as an engineer is very likely going to be working on the cloud. So it's kind of like you have to approach it from that perspective. So the angle that I would go with is, okay, if I am in an organization which is using the cloud, what are the benefits there, right? Well, that's one aspect of it. That's the motivator. Now, if we're going to the cloud, how do I have to change my day-to-day work as a Spring Boot developer or whatever else developer, so that I can build applications which can be deployed to the cloud, right? So that's a very open-ended question. Right? How do you build applications which can be deployed to the cloud? And from there you go into, okay, what is cloud native, right? What does it mean for an application to be cloud native? Learn about what makes an app conducive to the cloud. Learn about the technologies of the cloud, which kind of makes those rules make sense. And that's where I would. That was actually my personal journey as well, right? So at that point of time, I was like, what? Why is everybody talking about the cloud? It seems like a bad idea because you have vendor lock-in. Well, let me go dive into it. And then that's how my journey started. So that would be a good place to start.
Yeah. So basically, you start with analyzing how you deploy your application to the cloud, right? If I can make it really simple, probably you'd start with, okay, think about you have an application that you're building. How does it work when it goes to the cloud?
Yes.
And
right. What do I have to do? What different things do I have to do to make it cloud native or make it be able to go to the cloud, right? You start from there and then you get into like, okay, what are the technologies in the cloud? Why are they asking me to do these things, right? We talk about the 12-factor architecture. Like, what is the reason for those 12 factors? Well, you go into the cloud. Okay, so clouds are like this. Okay, now you have immutable instances, you have stateless services, and you have things that hold data and they remain for a long period of time. So we need to have separation of stateful versus stateless. We didn't have that in on-prem, right? And on-prem, everything was stateful. You can save a file to a disk and then it's going to stay there. That premise is gone now in the cloud. So you can understand that and go from there and learn the technologies.
Absolutely. Lovely. Siva, how do you see it?
So the way I get into this DevOps side of thing as a Spring Boot application developer, it's like, let's say I have one application, say any simple application that talks to a database. That's a simple application. Okay, now I need to learn how I need to deploy on a cloud, be it AWS or Azure or something like that. First thing is I read about what are the ways we can deploy a Java Spring Boot application on that particular cloud. Probably most likely there will be a tutorial. I just follow along and then deploy it. I don't try to learn every bit of it. I just deploy it. And then I get to know a practical way of how to do it, and then what are requirements. Suppose my application expects some kind of environment variables to talk to database, how I can provide it when I'm running on AWS. So just practicality, I get to know it. And then again I take a step back. Okay, why? What are the differences when I'm running it in locally, what I'm doing it, and when I try to deploy it on cloud, what differently I'm doing it. So again, as Koushik said, now it is not simply like, okay, you build an application, make it some configurable, and then just deploy it in cloud. There are cloud native is not simply those things. There are a lot more to it, like how do you monitor it, how do you auto scale it. So all kinds of things are there. So you need to go hand in hand. Like the way I see it is, if I just read 12-factor applications, and there are a lot of good things we understand a bit vaguely. Whereas when I deploy actually something, I can correlate, okay, oh, this is what they are talking about. You don't expect this log file to be in that particular folder. It can be anywhere. It can be EBS, it can be CloudWatch, anything. So when I have a bit of a practical experience, I can easily correlate what I'm reading about these principles and all. So my approach is like I go hand in hand, read about it, and then do a bit of hands-on. And then you build the knowledge on top of it, like deploy it and then take a step back and correlate the principles. So that's how I go about learning.
Yeah, I think my journey to AWS was something very, very similar. So I first actually deployed a Spring Boot application to like EC2. I created a VM, I installed Java, then I deployed the jar file there. And after that, I started deploying it to Elastic Beanstalk. And then, okay, okay, what the other approaches are present, containerize it and probably put it to Fargate. Yeah, so like basically exploring the different ways by like playing with them, like playing with hands-on. And only like after that, like I thought, okay, like cloud is bigger, and then probably we go bigger and kind of get a high level picture of it, right? So you try and deploy what, like get what cloud means to what I'm doing right now, and then kind of think about the big picture of the cloud and how things work as in the cloud as well, right? So cool. Yeah, one thing, like I think one, like from the viewer's perspective, I think one important point is, like Shiva made this point about reviewing what you have learned, right? Koushik also talked about it. So one of the most important things is, once you spend some time learning something, thinking about it and trying to like review, like trying to come up with, okay, these are the three things that I have learned. That actually helps me a lot. For example, right, I have books lying there around all everywhere. Like if you look at around this room, there would be like probably like 10 or 15 books where I keep summarizing things, right? So that really works for me. Koushik and Shiva, does that, like, do you do, I mean, Shiva, you already talked about it, right? So you said you write down a lot. So I like writing down really helps, I guess. Koushik, does it, how does it work for you? How do you summarize what you have learned? Do you do something like taking notes or something, or how does it work?
I actually don't. I take notes when I'm making a course. When I'm preparing a course, I kind of
Okay.
put together everything and make notes. But I don't when I'm just learning. What I
Okay.
do is I make like I have a code snippet library. All right, so I make code snippets. I found that to
Okay.
be super helpful when I'm like trying out these demos and exercises and all that stuff. When I realize, okay, this is how you do that thing, I save that thing as a code snippet. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like I don't have to remember it. I don't have to go Google it to find out how to do something. It's all there in my code snippet. I can easily retrieve it real quick. So yeah, I have a
Certainly.
huge code snippet library of pretty much everything, and using the keyboard shortcut, I can just invoke it and then use it. That's about the only notes that I take. I
Okay.
don't
Nice.
take notes otherwise. Maybe I should try it.
Okay. Okay. So Kaushik probably has learned something out of this question. I mean,
Absolutely.
I've learned tons as well. So I guess like one of the things I would request viewers to do is to like identify what are the three important takeaways from this discussion, and if you post it in the comment, that might be useful for others as well. So thanks a lot, Kaushik, Shiva, for being part of this discussion. As usual, we went beyond the time. Thanks a lot for your patience, and hopefully we'll meet again very soon.
Thank you, Ranga, and
Thank you,
nice talking
Ranga.
with you, Shiva.